Module 9, Aesthetics and Contemporary Philosophy. Lecture 9a, Aesthetics. Aesthetics. What is art? What is beauty? Aesthetics is one of the 5 classical divisions of philosophy, the others being metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and logic. We'll touch on a few topics. Philosophers differ between objectivists and subjectivists. Objectivists say there's something intrinsic in a work of art that makes it beautiful. It's in the object itself. Subjectivists disagree, saying that beauty is entirely in the eye of the beholder. It's in the subject, the person beholding the art. Plato and Aristotle have different views towards art, but they are objectivists. Beauty is intrinsic in the object. To them, art is imitation, and good art is good imitation. Plato. In the Dialogue Symposium, a mysterious woman named Diotima speaks to Socrates about beauty. For he who would proceed aright in this matter should begin in youth to visit beautiful forms, and first, if he be guided by his instructor aright, to love one such form only. Out of that he should create fair thoughts, and soon he will of himself perceive that the beauty of one form is akin to the beauty of another. And then if beauty of form in general is his pursuit, how foolish would he be not to recognize that the beauty in every form is one and the same. And when he perceives this, he will abate his violent love of the one, which he will despise and deem a small thing, and will become a lover of all beautiful forms. Beauty in this world is merely imitation of the perfect beauty in the world of the forms. The word for imitation is mimesis. If beauty in this world is mimesis, then art is imitation of reality. In other words, mimesis of mimesis. Art is imitation of imitation. That is why Plato had little use for art. In fact, he wanted no poets in his Republic. True beauty is in the world of the forms. Aristotle was much more supportive of art. There is no world of the forms, just objects in this world. If this world is the only reality, then art could enhance that reality. Art is still mimesis, but it creates emotions which can be positive. Aristotle was particularly concerned with the importance of theater. Good art, particularly good drama, creates a catharsis, which is a cleansing emotional experience. Every human needs a catharsis. The word means cleansing, which is healthy. Just as the body needs a physical cleansing, the mind needs an emotional cleansing or a catharsis. To the Greeks, art is still an imitation of reality. David Hume. Unlike the Greeks, David Hume is a subjectivist. Beauty lies not in the work of art itself, but in the beholder. He writes, "Beauty is not quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty." Hume believed that people can cultivate a greater sensitivity to art and come to appreciate its beauty. Anybody through training can become an art critic. Perhaps there is much truth in Hume's view that art and music appreciation can be a developed taste. I think of pieces of music we don't like when we first hear them, they grow on us as we become to understand them better. Immanuel Kant. As mentioned earlier, Kant's Copernican revolution was a turn to the subject. There's no God's eye view of reality, only our own subjective views, so Kant was also a subjectivist, but he disagreed with Hume, in that he felt that subjective feelings could be universalized. We can share our subjective feelings. Kant wrote his 3 famous critiques. Critique of Pure Reason, Kant's theory of knowledge. The mind organizes the world according to pre-established categories. These are his synthetic a priori statements, i.e. events happen in space and time. We already studied this. Critique of Practical Reason, Kant's theory of ethics. Deontological ethics based on a priori duties. This is where he introduced the categorical imperative. We already studied this also. Critique of Judgment, theory of aesthetics. It's subjective concern with subjective mind, not the actual object. The mind is able to enjoy beauty in a disinterested way. That word disinterested is important to Kant. Art's for enjoyment only. Art has no utility. In that sense, he separated aesthetics from ethics. Unlike ethics, art is not meant to influence what we do. Beauty is not simply in the eye of the beholder, nor is beauty an objective reality. Rather, since our brains share a structure with other human beings, so our brains share an interpretation of beauty. Kant wrote that we could disagree on whether a particular wine tastes good or not, but with art, although subjective, there are universal qualities regarding and enjoying a work of art. If he proclaims something to be beautiful, then he requires the same liking from others. He then judges not just for himself, but for everyone, and speaks of beauty as if it were a property of things. He is trying to make universal what is subjective. Kant differentiates between the beauty and the sublime. This is an idea originally suggested by Hume. Beauty is something that appeals to our senses and emotions, whereas the sublime has an air of mystery that can be overwhelming. Often we react to the sublime with a sense of awe and fear. Think of the Grand Canyon. That is why religious thinkers often talk about the sublime. But to Kant, the subject beholding something is most important, and reason rules the subject. Reason can control this sense of awe and fear. Kant built his philosophies of epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics based on human reason. This will be challenged by those who taught that art is based on emotions, not reason. In the 19th century, art moved from representation of reality to impressionism. Art does not imitate reality, but attempts to create emotions within us. Example, Picasso's Guernica on right. The painting in 1937 is a response to the Nazi and Italian bombing of the Basque town of Guernica. It appeals to the emotions about the horrors of war. We already mentioned that this emphasis on emotions rather than reason was part of the Romantic movement in reaction to the Enlightenment. The three masters of suspicion mentioned earlier in this class, Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud, were most prominent in challenging the Kantian emphasis on reason. Nietzsche often compared the Greek gods Apollo and Dionysus, their sons of Zeus. Apollo was the god of reason. Dionysus was the god of wine or passion. The West, beginning with the Greeks, had taken a wrong turn with their Apollonian view, depending on reason. It was time to return to a more Dionysian view, celebrating the passions, the emotions. This was at the heart of his Übermensch. Real creative energy has been stifled in the West. It was time to return to passion. Marx taught that art always reflects the needs of the ruling class. Like religion, it is part of a superstructure built on an economic foundation. The purpose of art was to keep workers in their place. That is why Soviet art celebrated the workers and classical art was considered bourgeois. To Marx, everything from art to religion to philosophy ultimately rested on economics. Freud taught that the ego is not rational, but constantly being battered by unconscious forces that it is trying to keep under control. He used the term sublimation for what gives form to these repressed feelings. Art grows out of the sublimation of the id or inner drives. The subconscious is fragmented, and such art as cubism, multiple points of view, reflects this fragmenting of the human psyche. This fits into what is often called postmodernism, which teaches that reality contains multiple viewpoints. We'll come to this in the next lecture. Girl with the Mandolin by Picasso on the upper right. In postmodern art, there is no one fixed perspective. Such art views the world through multiple perspectives. But the key issue of modern art is it appeals to the emotions rather than to the reason. Art philosopher George Dickey, 1926 to 2020, defined art as something decided by the community of artists, art collectors, museums, and art critics. Art is a practical term defined by practitioners of art. His approach is known as the institutional theory of art. It's difficult to find a definition of art and beauty that is acceptable to everyone. Perhaps the latter work of Ludwig Wittgenstein will be helpful. We will turn to this in the next lecture.